Hi everybody, my name is Victoria Kablys and I'm the Conservator here at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. I'm excited and honored to be here with you today to celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day and to share a very special experience with you. I'm currently standing outside the Indigenous Studies Collection, which is housed inside the RSM's Research, Exhibits, and Collections building. Prior to becoming the RSM, this institution was known as the Saskatchewan Museum of Natural History. The Indigenous Studies Collection includes items that date from the early 1900s to present day, and even some objects that are a little bit older than that. The room you see behind me houses the Indigenous Studies Collection, and we lovingly refer to it as the Indigenous Studies Cocoon. Well, because it's a room inside a room. Before beginning our tour, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the RSM is located in an area known as Askana Ka'us Teku. This land, the land upon which we are gathered here today, is Treaty 4 territory, the ancestral and unceded traditional territory of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis. We acknowledge the land in an act of reconciliation to those whose traditional territories we are on. We acknowledge those who have shared the land before us, those who will continue to share the land, and those who will share the land in the future. We further acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we are committed to move forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I would like to take a brief moment of silence before entering the cocoon to pay respect to the communities to which these objects belong. Is everybody ready? Because I am. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Victoria.
So everybody, I would like to introduce you to my co-hosts for this special event, Theresa Walter, who is our First Nations Program Specialist, and Holly Aubichon, who is a Métis artist and our Contract Collections Care Technician.
Thanks, Victoria. So again, I'm honored to be in this space today. This is a treat for me too. I'm not normally over in the collection here, so it's going to be, it's going to be good for me too to be in this space today. So I guess the first thing we sort of wanted to start off with is the porcupine head roach over here, or the headpiece here, that was part of the prairie chicken dance outfit of the late George Sipikus from Kwakatu's First Nation. And he loved to dance. He donated 2 of his dance outfits to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, I believe in '91, and then just wanted to keep dancing, heard the drum again and just thought, oh, I have to keep dancing. So came back and borrowed the outfit to continue dancing, and then again, the outfits came back to the museum. But we had a lobby display of Mr. Sipikus in the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, the lobby, in 2005, called "The Man Who Could Not Stop Dancing." So in honor of Mr. Sipikus. So we'll have a look at some of the rest of the outfits down here in this drawer. So we've got like his leggings and his headpiece, his belt. So beautiful, beautiful outfit. He also had a blue and white outfit too that we have. But we're honored to have his dance outfits here in our collection. And you can see by the beautiful, brilliant colors, we see a lot of geometric patterns in the outfits, pieces.
And I think the care and precision that was put into making this regalia is really special.
Well, and on June 28th, which is a Monday, we're also going to continue on with our prairie chicken dance story. Bird Mondays is our social media post is with Dr. Ryan Fisher, who is our
curator of
vertebrate zoology here at the Research and Collections building at the museum here. And he talks a lot about the different prairie birds. And so what we did was we found a prairie chicken dancer. Knowledge keeper Harold LaValle's son, Alwyn Four Eyes, is a prairie chicken dancer. So he came out to share his experience and knowledge and love of the dance, talked about it, and then did a dance performance for us and talked about how the dance mimics the movements of the prairie chickens. And then now Ryan will talk a little bit more about that too. So that's on Monday. Tune in for that. That's on Monday, June 28th. Okay, now we're going to head over to the birch bark examples here. So again, here we have in the squares here, when you see Angelique, that was a renowned birch bark biter here from northern Saskatchewan. Her name was Angelique Marasti, and she was famous for this artistic technique. They'd be larger squares than this too, but the paper is folded into 4. It's taken from the tree, removed in very, very thin strips, but the papers are folded in 4, and then with your eye tooth, you bite down and make patterns with it. And typically, and historically, women use these sort of as stencils for quill work and for beadwork. And it's a form that's coming back. There are more artists that are able to do this beautiful work. But when we look at the gifts from the trees, aside from birch bark bitings, we also look at more of a functional form, which is basketry itself. And these, again, would be something that women would be making, harvesting again from the birch tree. And again, thicker pieces of the bark are used, and they use spruce root to sew the baskets together. And so these could be used for going out and picking berries. They're storage containers. They could be used for plants, for herbs, etc. And then we also see some things on top of the baskets that are decoration. And Holly, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think maybe just to preface my knowledge before I share is that my knowledge has been gained from people sharing things that they know through casual or in collection spaces. And so that's where my knowledge has come from. And I also believe that there are a variety of answers for things or ways that people do things that I may not be familiar with yet. But it's been really sweet as a conservation and collections care assistant here, because I got to learn more about materials and functions like that, which have been really interesting to me. And so to look at these baskets, there's quite a variety of materials or things like color. For example, this basket, these pieces, it looks like quill to me because it's got a shinier color to it, but those purples and pinks, those dyes, throughout time, and you'll see later on in the tour that they can end up fading. So you see a variety of the color lasting there. As well as interesting to see throughout time, with damages, you can kind of see what happens underneath and the structure build of things, which I think is really beautiful. Yeah, other than quills that are decorated on this one, there's those plant roots you can see woven here, as well as the care of the trim. All of that extra effort just to add this is showing so much care and love from the artist, which I find super powerful. We're going to move over to moccasins now. So this is one of my favorite drawers in the collection. It's so sweet and so beautiful. It's a drawer that we have of children's moccasins. I believe this pair was shown online, but this drawer just shows such a variety of Indigenous people groups, styles, time. I'll point out a bunch of little tricks for you to look as you move maybe through the museum. Display cases, but things such as these fully beaded moccasins. This little one's my favorite. It's got a silk trim, like a purpley velvet, and it's got quill work woven in between it, as well as this little green outline on it is done through lacing horsehair with a thread. So this looks like a silk thread to me, and so there's horsehair that's wrapped like this, and then it's wrapped around, all the way around to give it a beautiful trim. I believe this one is Métis for their pointed toe. There's a few other people that I think do it, but it's kind of been coined as the Métis shoe, similar here.
What is this here on the moccasin here?
This is embroidered.
Like silk thread again?
Silk thread. It looks like silk to me. It's
That's
not always.
beautiful.
I believe it's a Métis slipper too. Métis were known for their embroidery, inspired by colonization and people traveling, French and all those other floral designs. You can see how innovative they were, taking what they saw and liked and making it their own, adding their own flavor and flair. And same with this one, it's even more vibrant in color. It's got that horse trim again. You would never know there was horsehair under there though, which is really awesome to see.
That was something I learned from Holly.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
We have some more moccasins to look at.
Here's another drawer of beautiful, these pointed toe moccasins I was talking about. You can see the seam run down the middle. I know there's a group of people Indigenous people in Alaska who have a similar style, but from Saskatchewan and what I know, it's the Prairies, that these are Métis or Northern Indigenous people of Saskatchewan. And I love this drawer because it shows so much innovation and design, like these sparkly beaded moccasins. There's 3 of them I can see right away. You think about the personal artistic style of the women who were creating these moccasins, whether it was for their children or loved ones. Well, of course, loved ones, because they put so much work and personal style in it. And you can see there's a different type of moccasin style here. It's like almost like a slipper. It's really beautiful.
You can see there's a little bit of something going on with what maybe once was a green bead in here. And from a conservation perspective, to me, that looks like it might be a sign of glass disease. And glass disease is something that is an inherent device in glass, or it's something that's, it's a result of not poor is not necessarily the word, but maybe incorrect or slightly off mixture of glass, where the network stabilizer, the flux, and the network former, the 3 sort of main components of glass, aren't in the correct proportion. And this will cause a deterioration over time, and you can kind of see a powdery sort of crystalline material that's sort of clouding the appearance of the glass now, and that is a deterioration product. And over time, if that goes untreated, or it's not stored in the proper environment, it can actually cause deterioration of, for example, the underlying thread work, which secures the bead. So here we're very fortunate in Saskatchewan. We have dry weather. Wet conditions will exacerbate things like this, and humidity will exacerbate it. And so while it might not be ideal for the hide in this area to be experiencing such dry conditions, I'm sure the glass disease is halted for that reason.
One more moccasin drawer before we move on.
And the collection has about 3,000 objects, yes? About 3,000 is in our Indigenous Studies collection, and we have about 200 of those items on display in the cases in the First Nations gallery at the museum. Oh, here's this beautiful red drawer here, and we see lots of quill work here.
Yeah, and red quill work is something that I found in the collection spaces that I've been in so far, kind of rare, because red dye does have
Fugitive.
I'm not sure what that word is.
Yeah. Oh, it fades quite easily.
Yeah. So it's really cool to see a drawer of this mostly intact red. But again, you see purple has lost its color here, and I assume the purple on the like little tongues here. From this style, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it has maybe Sioux locational, like design style, Sioux or Cree, more general, but I'm looking at the way that these beads have been tacked down. I think they're called a lazy stitch.
Yes.
Yeah. So they've got this long thing where you can follow where this artist started here, pinned down, and maybe went back through. Not fully certain, but that's a specific style you'll see probably through this tour.
Mm-hmm. And then with the stitching on the quills, right, that's the tack down style, because we have different styles of quill work that the quillers would be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Siouan peoples in this area are the Nakota, the Lakota, and the Dakota peoples. Yep. And we were fortunate in 2019, we did some cultural workshops over on the museum side. And we had Holly Aubichon from Standing Buffalo come in and do a quill workshop, 2-day workshop in November 2019 that people were really interested in. It was was an awesome workshop. And she talked about a variety of different styles of, like wrap and tack down, and you can do quills on a loom too. So yeah, very interesting, very beautiful work to see, the design and the technique and the colors on these moccasins here.
One last thing before we move on. I noticed this pair of moccasins have cones, so that when you're stepping around, you've got a little jingle going on. So who knows if they were for dancing or just to be heard. But things like that, I think, are such beautiful little elements of design and products of love, for sure. Yeah, it's so beautiful.
I think too, when Holly talks about that, we were talking a little bit about that earlier, that this is a special day also, that this is the 25th anniversary of National Indigenous Peoples Days that we celebrate and honor, Indigenous peoples of Canada. And that when we look at, a lot of the collection here is a lot of, when the museum first started in 1906, I believe we were, in 1912, when the tornado came through, some of the collections were damaged when they were over at the Legislative Building. And so there's sort of a call out for, clothing and items, objects. And so that sort of started the collection of the Indigenous Studies collection. And in about 1914, we did, was I think one of the first major collections that was donated, or that was like purchased from Edward Stanley. And he was a farm instructor in the 1890s onwards for a while at Daystar and Quacatoos. And so some of his collection, are reflective of that area and of his time being spent on the reserve as a farm instructor at that time period. But when we look at the material culture, we're looking at a lot of, clothes, a lot of household items like baskets, storage containers, moss bags, saddles, a lot of, materials that's being used, for day-to-day life. And when we look at the beautiful work, like if we just take a scan at the saddles here, we're going to head down that way to tools. But we look at the beautiful work that the women did, to honor themselves, to honor their families. So they wore their artwork, as you can see by the beautiful work that's done in the material that's in here. So I think we're gonna head that way.
Sure.
I'll follow my leader here.
So this is a collection of tools that we've pulled out to show kind of, again, materials and just like tactile tools. So here we have a scraper. You can see it's on a piece of bone. It's really interesting to see the bone as it deteriorates, and just interesting to see this natural.
So
And
the tip here. So the tip here is metal. So that, metal would have been coming into the area after, with the fur traders. When we look at people living here, we're looking at, my ancestors living here over 10,000 years ago. So it's a long history of people living in this area. And when we talk about pre and post contact period, here on the prairies, right here in the Saskatchewan area, post contact means when the first Europeans are coming in this area is about 1690. So the first man coming into this area, first European man, is Henry Kelsey, who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. And he's coming in from Manitoba in the summer. I think he gets here in July of 1690. And he's the first European man in this area. And he comes in with Nakota guides. So, of course, traveling via the river system, I'm not sure, because I'm not good with my geography. I think it's the Assiniboia maybe, or the Red River coming down into around the Yorkton area, I think is sort of where he came into the province. But so that's the time period that we know. So when we talk about post-contact, that means after that time period. So, the original raw materials for the tool makers, which are the men, are going to be stone, bone, and wood. All of the tools are made for that, for both women and men. And so when you see women's dresses, they would have their belts on, and that's where they would have their awl case, like so. An awl, I'm not sure if we have an awl here.
we've got all cases over there.
Yeah, it holds it's a bone. It's for leatherwork to get the hole through so that you can sew the hide material, or also to like if you're making buttonholes or whatever. So that's all the material that the men are using. So with this one, we see that there's metal here. So this is,
Close contact.
close contact, whereas this one is the edge is serrated. So it's the bone, the leg bone, possibly deer leg bone that has, it's like a steak knife. So it's cuts into the material when you're cleaning or scraping the hide so that they can be processed into clothing and moccasins, etc. These are our traditional hammers here. So often farmers or people, across prairies, we're, farm economy. If you could see, do we have just a loose hammer stone? You'll see lots of stones that have this little groove here. So if you imagine, this is the handle and how the hammer is attached to the wooden part of the tool. So this could be used to crack bones out, to get the marrow out. We're also going to, you can see the working bottom on here of the hammer that it's got wear. That we also can use it without the handle, but that would be good for crushing, like crushing berries, etc. Pegging down the stakes on the teepees, etc. So, lots of, examples of tools. In the lithics or the stone material, in terms of archaeology, we have, I don't remember everything, the archaeological, this is Knife River Flint here. What was I going to say about archaeological? Oh, so we also are the main repository for the archaeological material of Saskatchewan, and there's about 3,000 filed boxes at our RSM warehouse. This is a common stone here, Knife River Flint. So this biface, meaning that like it's been worked on both sides, is a knife, just a knife. The fancy little arrowhead here, or projectile point, the archaeological term, is a plain side notch. So about 1,500, 1,700 years ago, and this is hafted or attached with sinew onto the shaft of the arrow. And we have some arrow examples here that we can just pull out and have a look. So you can see the wooden part and then the feathers, and then the arrows would be attached to the ends there. So again, lots of work and skill in, making your equipment. We're looking at, obviously, for the time that we've been in this area as people's hunting and gathering society. Hunting the animals around us, specifically the bison or the buffalo, and then of course all the plants around too that we would be part of our, our foods, but also, our medicines, etc., and our sacred plants. Here again, we have some more equipment, hunting equipment. So we have a variety of bows here. And then again, this would be twisted rawhide. We even have, up here, we have a lacrosse stick.
If you're ready to move on.
Sure. Maybe we'll just mention the,
Give you this.
yeah. In the sacred collection here, we have about 400 items. These items have been identified as having be part of ceremony, or they have sacred. They're sacred, so that would be like pipe bags, pipes, rattles, whistles, etc. So these sorts of things are not in view, and they're not. It's by protocol that you would be able to view that. In terms of repatriation, we do have our repatriation policy document that was developed in 2010, and it is on our website. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you would like some more information, please check out the document on our website. Did we have a question?
Yeah, so just stepping back to the arrows, Lucille would like to know, how old do you think the arrow shafts are?
The shafts?
I don't know.
Is that Lucille Fisher?
It is. Yes,
Hi,
it
Lucille.
is.
Lucille was one of our participants in many of our workshops. So she, I'm glad you're here checking this out with us, Lucille. We would have to find out about that for you, but we can do that, right? Because if Victoria looks at that, we have the catalog number. And then what we would do, because that's sort of our identifier, is when things have a number on it, then they're accession, like that's how we put them into the system. And it would be a catalog system, all data-based. And so what we can do is this box here, what we'll do is we will go back and look at that number and then get back to you about what we think about the information that we have on file or on record.
Yes, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of items in this collection. And,
About 3,000.
yeah. I should remember everything.
So we are now in cabinet 8, I think. This is a beautiful cabinet.
Yeah, so
How about we look at some awl cases? So on awl, I should have had one with me, but it's a little, nowadays if you do leather work, it has a little wooden handle and a metal tip. And so the ones a long time ago, the awl would have been made out of bone. And so here's the cases here. Yeah, so they would be attached to the women's belts, and so would our knife sheaths, our sheaths that would hold our knives for working.
And when you look at just all of the variety of styles, whether it's a variety of bead trims or fringe trims, the colors used, shape, all of that stuff is like personal artists' decisions, as well as like this is a good example to show the variety of Indigenous communities who have specific designs that have symbolism to them or to their community, which we may not always know or see. And so to give you some examples, so the Métis people, often called the Métis floral beadwork people. If you look through, you can see some styles of florals. There's also a lot of Cree people who like to do florals, but this one, for example, could be Cree, could be Métis, but my reasons for calling it Métis is it has these little spiral designs, like this light blue one. It's got that twirl. Some people call them mouse trails, as well as the beaded trim with this loop style I've seen Métis people do before, but mostly the mouse trail little spirals. And I've heard, I'm not certain, but I've heard that it came closer to Cumberland House and those people over there who did those designs. Here's that lazy stitch again, I was saying, that's like crossed over, which you can tell just between these two, they are stitched down differently, because this one on this area is really tight. Again, we have more like cones over here to make noise, which is really beautiful. This awl case right here, this blue one, this blue color, the dark blue, it looks kind of greasy, and that's actually the name of the bead. And those beads, from my knowledge, come from earlier trade days. I'll show you a few times. Again, this looks like greasy blue beads. They're so beautiful. They're my favorite type of beads, but they're earlier trade. Here are also other old glass beads in a very different style. I don't see them often anymore used in contemporary or like today's Indigenous people beading. I'm sure they are used. I just haven't seen it. Yeah, and we can move on to another drawer.
But all the first beads coming into the area in the like early 1800s, 1820s, 30s, 40s into this area would have been glass, right?
Yeah, so next, this drawer is really beautiful for its variety again. These are called rondelles. Some people could use them for like heating pads. Maybe for your kettle or for other things. Design or regalia, like this little orange flowers, regalia piece. And that's a good place to look at a variety of beads, is that there's some metal beads on there. And I recently saw somebody post on Instagram, sorry I don't have a great source, but post that they learned that metal beads they're pretty rare and more used by Métis peoples. What I had seen, I'm not sure, but it's interesting to think about whether or not they've been traded or passed along from a certain trading post that Métis people had access to versus sharing and just sharing a variety of material. And when you think of the more like rare or more historical beads, and you can see them today in modern beadwork as well.
We have another question. So Bob is asking, were the beads square glass?
Where or were?
It says were. Were the...
There are like glass square beads.
And there's also some like these don't look entirely rounded, like they do look like they have
like geometric cuts.
Yeah, like they're not as if you compare it to the adjacent beads, you can see how beautiful and like plump and round those orange ones look relative to those metallic beads that have a bit more of
And over
Yeah,
here,
geometric finish.
there are longer and like cut where it gives a square effect, as well as many earrings. Here's another example of those longer ones. Many earrings, such as the ones that I'm wearing, you can show if you want. I recently made these, but they're with seed beads, which are the more contemporary ones. But often I've seen these beaded earrings made with square ones. It lays flatter, kind of looks more smooth. But both are totally up to the artist's choice.
It's beautiful.
Here's another example of, I think, a trade bead in the middle, that greasy style. It's a unique color too, and when you see those unique colors, I usually think like more earth tones or like sagey greens, things like that, but they have this almost coating to them, which gives them their name.
And you also mentioned something about their size. I remember when you were teaching me about the trade beads, you were saying that they're much smaller too, right? They can be a bit thinner.
Yeah, I have later, there'll be a saddle that we'll look at that I'll give a clearer example of that. But here's one example of larger beads. I believe the higher the number, the smaller they get. So these are probably like a size 8, where typical beads that are like the most common, I guess, are probably size 10s. So it fills space quicker, makes it easier to see. I don't know if anybody out there's tried beading before, but the amount of times you have to thread your needle or pick up beads. Maybe I can get someone to hold this for this part. So this is like quilled beaded or quilled strips, belts, and just other strips, which are so beautiful. So you get in close, you can see the variety of.
This one is just exquisite in my opinion. How tightly woven that quill work is.
They look like beads.
This one?
Right below, yeah.
Sorry. And even the one below too.
Yeah.
They're tightly woven.
Are they on a loom then, and then sewn down onto material? This
These
looks
ones
like
do look like
this
Yeah.
is loom work. I think this one too.
The
This is
precision.
beautiful.
Yeah.
See, and then they're sewn onto the strip then
Here's
for
a
belts or like onto clothing.
Hold this for a second, just the handle of it. Sometimes this thing decides to. Okay, I'm going to take it off because I don't want to have it fall anymore.
This is an example of that loom beading. You can see, so it'll be stretched like maybe on a piece of wood with beads or something to separate them to give these lines. And so that's why you can see how tight and how precise each woven piece is, and how tiny it is. And then in comparison to this one, especially that's faded all its colors from its once vibrant palette, you can see, as well as
Comparing the two, top and bottom, they're an A and B to one another. They're part 1 and 2. And my suspicion is that the one on top that is quite faded may have been on display at some point. And the organic dyes that are typically used for quill work and the natural dyes are specifically quite sensitive to light. And as you can see, light damage is irreversible and really just leaves back the traces of what was once there relative to the true vibrance of the original colors.
So some of the things then in this space that we would have to look at, like to help to conserve is like humidity and light. And
there's a lot of different things we take into consideration when caring for a collection. And I think Indigenous collections, especially now in this modern day and age, I think the first thing I'd like to talk to is about making sure that objects are cared for appropriately. So we do as much as we can to make sure that they're not just physically preserved, but that we facilitate their spiritual conservation and access to the collection. I think, in my opinion, as a conservator, though I care about the physical preservation, I care more about the connections these objects have to the people who matter, the people who these matter most to. But following that, in a more sort of strict conservation perspective, light is one of our agents of deterioration. And so if something goes on display, we really try and consider how much light it's going to be exposed to and make a calculated risk evaluation on how much fading would be appropriate so that this piece can be viewed and accessed. Because to hide something away forever is also, in my opinion, not the best approach. This material isn't, we're not gatekeepers. We should be sharing this with everyone because it does not belong to us. But that being said, there's also things like humidity and temperature, and all sorts of materials are affected differently by temperature and humidity. For example, metal loves things extra dry. It helps keep corrosion at bay. You think about, iron and how that iron gets that really bulbous orange corrosion product. That's because of moisture a lot of the times, or salts. And we try and mitigate those environments. But hide, for example, does not like being extremely dry. If you think of a hide drum, for example, you want to try and keep your temperature and relative humidity, which are very intrinsically tied to one another, as balanced as you can, so that there aren't drastic fluctuations. Because imagine, the wooden structure of a drum versus the stretched hide over it. Those are two materials that work in tension with one another. And so with great fluctuation, what you'll have is a drum that'll split. And other materials also have tensions. If you look over at those quillwork pieces there, I'm not exactly sure what's happening with them, but I think they're a really interesting little case study. And I'm interested in doing a little bit more research to find out what's happening, because it seems to me, I would say that the underlying fabric and the tension of the quillwork on top of it are at odds with one another, and it's causing those strips to start twisting. And it would take a very calculated and careful intervention to try and flatten them out, because we don't want to, when things start to twist and fold, we don't want to work too hard against them and cause them to crack or further damage. So that's on my list of future research projects, to figure out what's going on there and what would be an appropriate intervention and form of care for those objects. Is it appropriate for them to continue to be allowed to twist the way they are, or was intervention necessary to make sure that they're appropriately cared for?
So because I work on the museum side, and sometimes we'll have visitors' comments about that. It seems so dark down here. Like
Yes.
when we're in the material culture area, where there's the Blackfoot shirt, and there's all those beautiful moccasins and the different, the display cases
Yeah.
beside the eagle painting.
Yeah.
It's a little bit dark there, and is that because we're just helping to preserve
Yes. So
the materials in the cases?
yes, it's two-part. I think those cases were all closed in and established over 20 years ago, and I think our conservation perspectives have also evolved a lot in the past 20 years. And though I'm no advocate of blasting things with light, because, like I said, light causes irreversible damage, and UV light also causes irreversible, or light in the UV spectrum, I should say, causes irreversible damage that can also be like a physical damage, not just something visual. So these are things that we have to keep in mind, but I'm an advocate for making sure things are accessible. And so it'd be nice to, in the future, be able to address that and look at the light levels in our galleries and make sure that they're appropriate to people being able to see them, but also maintaining a certain amount of preservation over the collection. But in short, yes, that's why. If the less light that these items are exposed to over time, the less likely we'll have a shift that will happen like this here. And as I mentioned, it's a constant calculated risk assessment that we have to take, and weighing the value of making sure that things can be seen and accessed by our visitors, but also preserved for future people to enjoy and learn from as well.
Okay, moving along.
Next, we're going to look at some cradle boards. Theresa, do you want to take this one on?
I will try. So like these are our long ago backpacks. So think nowadays when you're out with baby, you may have your snugglies in the front, which would be like our moss bags here. They're attached to the wooden boards. And just think like if you go camping or you're outdoors, you can have those metal backpacks. That's sort of what this is. So again, the cradle boards are made out of wood, and then we have, this is that navy, is this the navy broadcloth here?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
Almost looks black.
Yeah. This one down here is from the Stanley collection here, this cradle board here. Beautiful example of geometric patterns, lazy stitch it looks like, and then this pattern here too. Recently, we had a post, I think, on June 18th that talked about the Stanley collection and advertised that we were going to be doing this tour. And we linked it to Dr. Julie Mashinsky, who did a doctoral research paper on the Stanley collection. and making those connections to, the community or to the object, the people that made these items. And the Stanley collection was donated, the museum purchased it in 1914 from Edward Stanley. And I think I might have mentioned that he was a farm instructor at Kwaktus Daystar. So when she was doing her research, she wanted to talk to community members, and they were able to take out 3 items, and one of them was this cradle board to Kwaktus to meet with the elders and get a better perspective on the materials and design, etc. And talk a little bit about how did this collection, come about. And some of it was purchased, or it was the idea of reciprocal, like gifting. In other words, Mr. Stanley perhaps received this or another object, and in return, not necessarily right immediately, but in return, he would then give something back to that person. And at that time, we're in the turn of the century. We've got rations. It could have been rations, or it could have been a pass to go off the reserve to visit or to go to town to get supplies, etc. So they talked a little bit about that, which I thought was really interesting.
You have a comment on material.
Sure.
I'll just highlight this. I'm not 100% certain, but I believe that this wool cloth here, if you've heard of Hudson Bay blankets, there's a long and large history of them. But I believe that textile ends with a lost or a separated pattern than the original fabric that you'd be buying. So I believe this is like an end of roll type thing, which if it is, it's really sweet that possibly the mother who made this, or grandmother or auntie or somebody who made this was being resourceful with materials while achieving an aesthetic that adds beauty and glam to a piece that may have been thrown out by somebody else. That's what I believe this is, which is just a cool detail and sign of resourcefulness and creativity and imagination. You want to move out to the dress?
Sure. I just wanted to mention that often I think historically museums, we have the wrap again, as I mentioned, for being the gatekeepers, but Julie's project was an amazing opportunity to send 3 objects back to a community to have, for the opportunity for people to actually see them and engage with them. And we reorganized. Holly, myself, and another contract conservator, Emily Demers, had worked on reorganizing this space between 2019 and 2020, creating a lot of the housings, these trays and containers that are storing and supporting the objects that you see here. And I think it was a great success, in my opinion, for us to be able to safely send out and travel these objects to, again, the people who these objects matter most to.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add to that too, so this really opened it up in the sense of having a better visual understanding of what we have in the collection here, and just greater accessibility, for the staff that work here, or if people are interested in coming to view the collection. And so that's really helped to, open up the space and just, in terms of, what is here, and just being able to view it, because it was a little bit more difficult in its early years. And I think we are going to be heading outside now. Just outside on our working tables here, we have a couple of beautiful examples here of the collection.
So we'll take a look at this dress first. It's quite a large object. Now this is a buckskin dress. It looks like an adult woman's dress. I don't know a whole lot about this. There's a beautiful dress as well at the Moose Jaw Museum that is triggering my memory. So it's interesting to think. My ideas coming across this and what I've seen so far with this shawl-like opening that Victoria will show in a moment. I've seen people say that it looks like Sioux work or Cheyenne style design. We've got our lazy stitch. And here's those glass, or I think they're glass or plastic, I can't remember now. Plastic beads, right. And those ones, from my memory, are older than these glass beads, for example. I don't see them as often, but I have seen shirts that are completely made through woven plastic beads, as well as these shells are really interesting to see in the prairies, especially. So you can think about the trade routes or where people were giving things.
Those are cowrie shells, and so they are also used to sort of as money too, across, nations, across, continents, basically. So
Yeah. And then again on this chest, you can see this shawl like with these beads. So they're this is post contact. You can see the beads dangling down. So the noise and just the grace that this woman would have been walking around with. You can just imagine how beautiful she looked and how much care and love is put into this work. These side hinges are fringe is beautiful, so delicate.
And even just thinking of the time and the effort that it takes to construct a garment like this, I mean, the hide has to be sourced, all the beadwork has to be sourced, all these individual elements need to be, sewn together, and these really beautiful collaborative patterns that sort of beautiful visual that draw you across the arms, the shoulders, and down around the hem of the skirt. There's so much intention behind it, I think, that and not just like a physical labor, but also a labor of love, like Holly keeps talking about.
Yeah, like can you imagine if you had 3 sisters and you had to get the dress you liked the least? No. But like just the care and genuine like relationship to colors, or even though not everybody I think is or needs to know all of the information that maybe a family may have this may have had in a connection to this blue, for example, or maybe it has a symbolism to them or their community or just their family. And those kind of things come through conversations with the Indigenous people who have made them or are holding them from past family members too. But just such a large and beautiful piece.
Or contemporary, artists like, beaders today. Like, I think that's the opportunity. Like, I think when the Cradle board went out to Cockatoos, that they noticed similarity in patterns between like some historical photographs and I think the leggings that went out, or perhaps it was the Cradle board itself. But again, too, when we're looking at materials that our women are sourcing for design or decoration before glass beads come into the area with the fur trade, we see shell as evidenced on the dress here. We've checked out some of the beautiful quill work. We're also looking at dentalium shell, which is the longer white pieces of shell that we'll see in outfits then and today. And also bone, teeth, claws, like elk's teeth dresses. And I'll just show you my earrings here, which are bone. So this is deer antler that has been cut and carved by Miles Anderson from George Gordon First Nation. So beautiful example of, work with natural materials. So deer antler.
And you can see us Indigenous ladies like to even dress up today.
Yeah. Well, and we would wear, like besides dresses, but like ornamentation, like hair pieces, necklaces, earrings, etc. I mean, and when we find copper and silver, here it's been traded in. It's not typically like from mined in this area. It's coming from the east and from the south. And so sometimes when you see, differences in design or pattern, color, it's an introduction of, new materials coming in from, trade and from, we had extensive trade links with our neighbors, with various First Nations for thousands of years before, we continued a new tradition with the fur traders coming into the area of trading. So we're going to take a look at the saddle now.
This is our last piece, I believe. And it's such a fun one to investigate, and I challenge you guys watching to go into the museum and try to test out some pointers that I'll point out in this one to see what you see. But something that stands out immediately from this saddle to me are these white beads. If you zoom into all of these filler beads, they're tiny. They're like slivers, like in width. You see how some of them are like my comparison to a pinky, if you can see. They're tiny, and these ones are larger. These are larger than the standard size 2. These are again like that size 8, I think. But these got to be like a 12 or 14 because they're tiny. Even this strand, you can see where they've broken off, how many beads that takes. And I think when you stitch beads down, like a lucky number for many is 6. So if you can imagine how long that takes to stitch down and then tack down. Some beaders work with 2 needles, stretching one over and then tacking down with a second. Others work with 1 and backtrack. So a corner that takes this much isn't a 15-minute job. It's way longer, and it's straining on your back, on your patience, on your eyes, yeah. And then you can even see the contrast of the white beads to the floral designs. These floral designs, to me, stand out as Cree and not as Métis. I guess I didn't show that much Métis beadwork, but to give you the examples, but you can see just in this like a leaf pattern, this blowout leaf that fills a large space. Like that, I've seen Cree people do, as well as this flower, this mini and this outer, with this kind of like bubble shape. Stands out to me, as well as this double blue. It's probably more contemporary to do this now, but I think back in the day, not that I was alive then, but from hearing from people, these heavy blue colors have been used a lot by Ojibwe people and have a lot of symbolism of water. Now, I don't know if that's what this is, notioning towards, but if you see large blue pieces and you can see a location of them, it's really cool. And here's that, maybe it looks like a lazy stitch. You can see this carry over, and even this pink is tiny compared to that white. Can you see the variety, or like this red? They're very different. And here you've got your, I think, silk thread outlining and a cloth of some sort.
The turquoise beads are also, like in these triangles, are also absolutely tiny little slivers.
And something that I noticed just today when we pulled this out is that you see this wool trim that's coming along is actually a wool thread wrapped around some either sinew or raw hide. You can see it split open over here. I'm not sure if you need a second light or not, but along this line, here's the raw hide, and here's the woven part of it, which is like, you can imagine you finish your piece and you've got one last final touch, but your final touch takes you 7 more hours. Like, and obviously it has to be incredibly durable to be a saddle, which is being operated and used, which is why I think you can also see that it's been well used, and it has a lot of loose beads coming, especially on this side, which maybe Victoria, you can talk about.
Sure. Take off one cloth.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I agree with Holly. I think this is an absolutely exquisite example. And as I'd mentioned previously, here at the RSM, we're really, I think, considerate about our approach in conservation. And by us, I mean me, because I'm the only person in conservation. But I try to be very considerate with my approach. I advocate for looking at an object's life as a history and not erasing parts of its history by trying to restore it to some sort of ideal pristine, which in my opinion doesn't exist. And that's also reflective of a lot of current conservation thought. But in this case, we see that there is, I think, a true risk of loss if it stays like this. And it would be a good candidate for treatment just to stabilize what exists and try and tack down those loose elements just to prevent, like here you can see, this was, maybe carried slightly the wrong way. These beads could most easily fall and be lost. And I think an intervention in this case wouldn't be about trying to mimic anything or replicate what isn't there, but more so just taking the existing lines of beads and ensuring that they'll be safe and stable for the future. And typically when conservation work is done, there is meticulous documentation. We take pictures before, we take pictures during, we take pictures after, and we record all of our interventions so that in the future, if they're seen as unsuitable, that they can be removed or redone if necessary. And one place where that's a little bit more difficult is dirt. It's very hard to put the dirt back. So I try to take a very measured approach to cleaning as well, in the sense that I see that this saddle is dirty, but in my opinion, that's part of the object's life history. And to try and clean all that off would remove evidence of its use, of its history, and in the end, really doesn't change all that much about its current preservation. So But the beads, for example, that's an example of where something that we could do to make sure that no further loss is incurred during its time with us.
Here's just another example of, I was saying with Cree flower beadwork, is this like full coverage, whereas there's not a lot of white background. See this leaf, how it's got this explosion of pinks and reds. I'm not sure what the pinks and reds are supposed to represent, but it's just filling space, and it's beautiful. Yeah. Here's a blue, this rounding color. It's got that greasy look again. I think another trade bead. This yellow one could possibly it, but it may have that look due to just like the remaining dirt on it. And more wool tassels on the end with those plastic beads. These little like tassel style things too, or I've seen a lot. There's bags, some people call octopus bags, that belong to Métis people, and they do like 8 of these hanging off. So I've seen this specific style in many worn material.
Okay, I think that's it. Do we have any more questions?
No?
Well, if you have any questions that you think about after, you can contact us. Our general information mailbox is...
Email's on the screen
Oh,
right
there you
now,
go.
so
It's on
we're
the
all
screen.
good.
Everyone going to have to see it. So I thank you again. Today's also the first day of summer. So happy summer day, and kids are almost out of school. So we will be heading into full-fledged summer. So again, I thank Rebecca and Betta, our techie people, for showing this live to you today. And again, I thank Victoria and Holly and yourselves as the audience for joining us on our tour of the Indigenous Studies Collection here at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, everybody.